I don't know if you know this, but classical ballet is over 300 years old. And I can still imagine it actually going for another 300 years and challenging audiences with its just incredible performances of what the body can actually achieve, besides the entertainment and laughter and joy and tears it gives. But it is solely driven by women, and women have been a greater influence in classical ballet than they have in more than any other art form. Now, it started obviously in the 18th century in the Italian courts, and then in the French courts of the nobility. And it was loved by Louis XIV, who started it, being a man. But he loved it so much, he actually had to perform in his own ballets. And these were part, first, of these day-long banquets that they had in these royal courts, where to break up all these courses of meals that they had that were so grand, they performed ballet and poetry and song. Now, ballet became so popular because of this, they actually even started an academy of dance in Paris, and it was there where women suddenly found that they could do something incredibly special with this art and dominate it. There was two ballerinas that are worth talking about called Camargo and Salé that actually even influenced society's fashion by scandalously changing women's outfits. Now, they had obviously these incredibly heavy costumes, these boned bodices, these large, in the 18th century, these large hoop skirts. And what they did to be able to show off more of their technique, more of their dance, was by shortening the skirts and showing off the ankle, and being able to create more technique and show more footwork and everything. Because ballet at first was just about posing, because they really couldn't do much in these outfits. And so it was a lot of arm gestures and it wasn't a lot of movement, basically. But what they did, these two ballerinas, is actually lighten the costumes, take layers off so they weren't so heavy, so that they could move and jump in them, and actually developed the art form and move the body and just become more creative with the physicality. Now, I know we have a little bit of footage to show you of people that have recreated what they would have actually danced. So this would have been just outside Paris, and these are what the dancers would have been like at that period, which is obviously quite theatrical and dramatic, but again, just a lot of arm movements and footwork, just walking around with the men behind in their elaborate costumes. But then here we come with Camargo and the solos that she would have done to her audiences that showed a lot of beats, and they even actually softened their shoes with satin so that they could be more expressive with the footwork. And that followed in with the society wanted to have their shoes made exactly like those dancers. So they were influencing people as they went. In the 19th century was the Romantic era, with all arts thinking of the ethereal world. The supernatural, if anything, became incredibly popular. But also this was a time where suddenly ballet was elevated and respected to such a state that the men were actually pushed aside as a dancer and were just there to support the ballerina, to make her look even more spirit-like or more like a fairy, that she would float in these beautiful lifts. So they weren't part of the choreography at all. They were only there as sort of the truckers, lifting these beautiful ballerinas. Their dresses were becoming shorter and shorter so they could show more and more technique. It was even influencing artists, where somebody like Degas was not just painting the dancers on stage, he was actually going backstage and seeing them in rehearsal and showing that the amount of work that had to be done to actually achieve these performances. I mean, I've always been asked, "Well, what do you do?" And I say, I'm a ballerina. And they say, "Oh, what's your day job?" And I go, "What? What do you think? How do we get these performances on that stage?" I mean, it's extraordinary now how much rehearsing we do. We can rehearse 4 different ballets while we're performing another ballet on stage in the evenings. And our day is always full. And I don't think the public even then even appreciated the amount of work that goes in to create those lines, those shapes, the elevation, the turns, and everything that was expected from our coaches and our teachers for us to do. There was one ballerina that really transformed ballet, an Italian ballerina called Taglioni, that she, in her soft satin slippers, that literally that's all they were. I mean, I know people think that they're made out of wood nowadays, but they're not. She actually came on stage in one of these ballets like Sylphide or Giselle, where she is this spirit, and literally rose up onto point without any support. And the audience were just in shock. They couldn't believe. They really did think she was magic, how she achieved this. And this was just because her feet were incredibly strong. But it was only for that second. And from then, ballet transformed, and they had to create more and more professional point shoes that we could support ourselves and bourrée across the stage on point, and do 32 fouettes on the spot on point, and balance for longer, and turn for longer. And then pas de deux became much more creative because the lines that were created because of the point shoe and what we could do just got further and further. It was a very exciting time, and all because of this one lady just getting up onto point for those 2 seconds that just transformed dance. And then there was also a Russian ballerina, Anna Pavlova, who came from Russia on her own and came to London and Europe knowing that she was going to become famous, even though when she was first seen on stage, she really wasn't a very beautiful woman. She was quite ugly, she was quite gangly, she didn't even have a strong technique, and wasn't seen in Russia as any great star. But when she came to Europe and she performed, she often created some of her own solos. People were outstanded by her theatricality, her emotion, and what she could give to a performance, a story that she could tell. We hadn't seen that before. She was giving a different emotion to every movement she created. And it was a big change, especially for the West, to see this. But she was also one of the most amazing publicists of her own. She knew commercially how to sell herself. She knew what to dress like to make an entrance, to be, everybody was just thought she was the superstar. This was a will of force. She even took herself on tour as an individual and performed all these solos. This is actual original footage of Anna Pavlova, and you can see her emotion and her belief in herself with what she was performing. But she knew if she went to places around the world that they had never seen ballet, they were going to be outstanded by her expressiveness, how she got through these different works. I mean, she did. She threw herself to the floor. People were so taken by her. And this was one of her most famous roles that she performed nearly 4,000 times, which I really can't believe, but she did. But generally, there's not a lot of technique going on. She bourrées a lot. It's called the Dying Swan. And I've actually seen this costume that she took on tour with her, which is just covered in real feathers. And it's in the British Museum and tucked away in a box, but I actually got to see it for myself. And she even advertised a perfume at Selfridges, one of the first department stores. She knew exactly how to sell herself and become one of those top superstars. Quite comical. I mean, only the Dying Swan is actually performed now by older ballerinas. There you go. You can see that she knew how to act like the star. She was like probably like one of the film stars of that generation in the ballerina world. But again, quite spindly and gangly for that time, where they always liked to be softer looking. It was more fashionable. Now in the 20th century, suddenly, probably because of Anna Pavlova, it became much more international. Ballet became much more international and dramatic and more physical. We were expected now to be able to perform longer ballets, to perform, like Swan Lake was often performed by 2 ballerinas, Odette Odile, because it was too strenuous to do it for only 1 ballerina. So when it was first created, Odette was one and Odile was another woman, and they both principals came on stage and competed against each other. But now that role is played by 1 ballerina because now we have the strength and the technique, and this is when it started in the 20th century. These roles we became stronger. And there was one ballerina who came over in 1956 from Russia. She was Stalin's poster girl, basically. She was at the end of her career, and there's some amazing footage that I will be showing you. Ilanova came, she had this extraordinary jump. She had this physicality and this freedom of movement that we had never seen. So much more. Here she is doing Romeo and Juliet, most beautiful piece of footage. And she just flew across the stage. I mean, they were used to large stages where we really weren't in Europe at all. And they really moved and were very expressive and just larger than life, basically, the Russians. But she was also a brilliant actress, which we really weren't in the West. We were more black and white, movie stars, no talking and a lot of action in the facial expressions. And then we have, obviously, our own homegrown star, Margot Fonteyn, who had a very international life where they toured. She was single-handedly propelled the Royal Ballet onto the international stage just with her beauty and grace. And she had this stardom. She had a spark when she came on stage. I was fortunate enough to be coached by this lady, and she was stunning. She was able to tell a story with 1 movement. She had learned from all these Russian ballerinas what it was to get on that stage and have that artistic ability. Here she is. I mean, it's very fine. She was called beautifully, simple lines and very clean, and that's what we associate as British ballet. But also the ballet world was affecting film, like with Fred Astaire and Gene Kelly. Ballet, they actually trained in classical ballet. And also it was in the musicals, even West Side Story, there was ballet choreography put into these musicals as well. So it was becoming more and more popular. Where this is obviously Swan Lake, which, showing more leg. The tutus were shorter now, and the technique was becoming stronger. Now, in the 21st century, this is the century I was inspired to be a ballerina. And I have to say, as a British ballerina, I was never seen as being British because I was tall and athletic. And this wasn't fashionable, even when I first started. And I was, even though I had talent, they always said that I wasn't going to play Juliet and I wasn't going to play Aurora, the big classics or anything. And I was rather disappointed, to say the least, when I was told this, and that I would probably only make it if I went to America because the dancers there were much stronger and more physical and they were more favored. But it did change for me because I met Sir Kenneth Macmillan, this great choreographer who changed. He also was starting to create works that were about real life and about real people instead of the fashion of just being about fairy tales and things that weren't real, basically. And so I was inspired by him, and he pushed me. But also there was a French ballerina that started to guest with a company when I was 19, and she was taller than me and was the same physique, but she was, one of the étoiles in the Paris Opera, and she came, and it just opened so many doors. Suddenly I was accepted because of her, and I have to thank her a lot, even though we were quite competitive, and she never spoke to me, actually, when she was in the company. But she did open many doors, and I then did the roles like Juliet that they always said, oh, you're too tall, you'll never look like a 14-year-old. And I was like, well, there is acting, and I can produce this. But they didn't like me being a physical dancer, but works were created, and choreographers had to find other ways to produce more ballets, and that was mixing the classic with the contemporary. So this is me actually playing a warrior, a lady warrior. I'm actually a god, believe it or not. And very hard to perform in a helmet like that, I tell you. But this was actually choreographed by Sir Frederick Ashton on Margot Fonteyn. And so I never believed that she would have done a role like this that would have been so physical. And it was all jumps, and we were very domineering all the way through the ballet. And it was a wonderful role to play. And I actually did this role after I had my second child. So it was such an achievement for me to get back into a role that was physically very, very difficult. And I have all women supporting me there. I can't tell you actually what you're feeling in your legs at this point. They're kind of dead. You can't actually feel them. And you're going point, point, point. It's all about finishing well and never looking tired. And this is only the beginning of the ballet. There's another 2 acts to go. But I was very proud that I made a good impression on British ballet. I know that ballet is all about females constantly challenging the impossible, and we still do it. And for me, I made a comeback, and this is the closing ceremony Olympics, where 200 ballerinas were on that platform supporting me. I was flying in with pyrotechnics going off, which was probably the biggest entrance I've ever made, which was terrifying. But I just couldn't believe it. There we were celebrating athletes and the exceptional 2 weeks of the Olympics. And they let us as dancers come on and celebrate that. And that was something that had never been done before. So I was so proud. You see all the ballerinas, there they are, lying down. And there are my 4 men that are going to basically make me look fabulous. But it was one of the most exciting performances I ever did. And to think that was only 3 years ago. That's scary. But that was my last proper performance ever. But what a way to finish. Very exciting. I was there to actually put the flame out, apparently, which I only realised on the night because we'd never been able to rehearse in the actual stadium until the very, very day of the closing ceremony. But there you go. That's part of my life that I know will keep affecting so many, but is very much about the strength of the woman. Thank you.